All right, I'm gonna pop my nice chatting books with y'all. See ya.
Woohoo.
All right, AJ, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to call the Springfield work session for the Springfield City Council to order with roll call.
Mayor Van Gordon,
Here.
Councilors Pitts,
Here.
Moe,
Here.
Rodley,
Here.
Stair,
Here.
Woodrow, and Pictionary.
Pictionary's here.
And Councilor Woodrow is excused for the evening. We have 2 items tonight. So the first item is wastewater and stormwater user fees for fiscal year 21/22. And I don't know who's starting here. All right, Matt, you just popped up. So we're going to turn it over to you.
All right, welcome, Mayor and Council. With me is Catherine Bishop. There she is, Environmental Services Program Manager for the city. I'll share my screen. We have a little presentation here for you, and we'll get started. Can you guys see that? Okay. All right. So the presentation outline tonight, we want to discuss a few things with you at a high level and really take the feedback that we get from council tonight and incorporate that into a public hearing that's scheduled for next Monday night. These will be the things we're talking about. Go ahead, Catherine.
In terms of the revenue goals, we're looking to provide resources for O&M programs having to do with local wastewater and stormwater services. Also to fund the capital improvement program for both of those services and to maintain debt service requirements having to do with revenue bonds and loans. And also to increase capital reserves to make sure that we have funding within our capital reserves to continue to build out the systems and to meet permit requirements while also maintaining fiscal health and a good credit rating.
Okay, so we show this slide, or we have shown this slide several times in the past, but I think it's important to keep in, give council a perspective of the size of the systems we're talking about. So the wastewater and the stormwater systems in the city of Springfield have an asset value of several $100 million. There's 2 components to the wastewater system. We have the local conveyance system, which includes local pump stations that the city of Springfield owns. And then there's a regional component that is managed by MWMC. And we have over 240 miles of pipeline in town. On the stormwater side, we have over 190 miles of pipeline, numerous catch basins, as you can see, and an ever increasing number of public water quality facilities, in addition to a large amount of private water quality facilities, and as well as numerous outfalls to our local waterways. So it's important to note that user fees really are the sole source for funding operations and maintenance associated with these 2 systems. The challenges to pay for clean water are many, and this is really why we're here for you tonight. So I won't go through these in detail, but we have fixed operating costs. Basically, regardless of customer usage, the cost of own and operate and maintain the system are the same. We have infrastructure of various ages, and not listed here actually is the additional infrastructure that we've been adding over the years that needs to be maintained. We have regulatory requirements that are continually changing and becoming more stringent. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about the permit, the stormwater permit in the next slide. We have inflationary pressures which exist. Many times capital construction costs inflate at costs higher than your average CPI. Materials and services for construction, for operating the system continue to increase, as do personnel services for personnel associated with the systems. And then we've seen significantly reduced federal funding over the years to the point where at present, basically the federal government no longer partners with the local communities to fund these systems. It's exclusively the city's responsibility to fund the needed improvements and requirements associated with our systems. And then lastly, we have some debt service obligations to pay off payments and interest associated with bond sales that we have made in the past. With respect to our discharge permits, the council is aware we're currently operating under an administratively extended stormwater permit from DEQ. We have DEQ has issued a modified permit March of 2021. The city has contested that permit, the previous iteration of that permit. However, we expect that with this go around, things are looking substantially improved, and pending any additional litigation from a different group, we would expect that this permit would become effective for us sometime approximately June of this year. And that permit really lays the foundation for the programs that we have and the requirements that we have to put in place to meet water quality standards and other obligations in the permit. On the wastewater side, the permit is issued to MWMC chiefly, but cities of Springfield and Eugene are also named on the permit. And we are expecting a new permit on the wastewater side at the end of this year. We just got confirmation from DEQ today that they expect to issue it towards the end of September. There'll be some requirements for the city as a result of that permit. Most of those will fall to MWMC. And then I won't go through these in detail either, but just to give the council an idea of some of the types of programs that the user fees fund, they're listed here. One of which that we always like to highlight is our education and outreach programs. Things like our upstream art campaign. This is a picture of our revised and revamped Canines for Clean Water calendar contest, where residents can put pictures of take pictures of their dog and pledge to scoop the poop and keep that stuff out of our waterways for a chance to be featured in the calendar. So this is a required element of our stormwater permit, and it's the way we interact with the community. And it's one of the many programs that our user fees fund. With that, I'll turn it back to Catherine.
Okay, in terms of local wastewater services, there's obviously the ongoing maintenance having to do with maintaining the system and keeping things flowing in the right direction. Next slide, Matt. And in terms of factors, rate factors, on the wastewater side, it's important to know that we're planning on $7.8 million in user fee revenues with a 3% increase. And that will help to the revenue bonds in terms of capital investments as well and customer usage. It's important to note on the customer usage for local wastewater, it's fully volumetric. So there isn't a base fee or a change in fee based on strength. The strength components are on the regional side. So this is per unit customer usage. And as you know, there's been more water efficient fixtures and low flow devices. And so that does kind of reduce the amount of flow from time to time. And of course, water conservation. So local rates for wastewater, Springfield wastewater are flow-based. Next slide. This is a rate comparison, and we're really looking back at rates that were adopted as of January 15th. So we're really looking back at the beginning of this fiscal year. And this is also in your packet on attachment 3 in terms of your AIS packet. And as you can see, we have several communities here. When we do the rate analysis, we're looking at 5,000 gallons because it's just easier to set it that way and be consistent. But it's important to know that in Springfield, in terms of single family residential, it's really about 4,300 gallons. So this somewhat overstates what some customers might use, but we do have customers that would use the 5,000 as well. You can see in about the center where there's the blue on the top, that's Springfield. The blue component is the regional wastewater, and the green component is the local Springfield wastewater collection system. You can see that the average of these communities is about $54, almost $55 a month. That assumes that you're using 5,000 gallons. But if we look back at this and think of that customer for Springfield at 4,300 gallons, it's $45.70. Next slide.
This is just a transition slide. Moving into stormwater services, just wanted to note a really cool art graphic here from our upstream art contest that occurred last year, and then some storm drainage ditch maintenance that's occurring by our operations group. Both of these are required elements of our stormwater permit.
Okay, and now looking at stormwater funding and sources, the user fees are currently projected at 7.5 million in revenue for the upcoming year. One thing about stormwater is it is pretty much a fixed fee. So when it's a residential customer, it's a fixed amount, single family residential. Any other commercial or industry type accounts, those would be based on impervious surface. And so that would change based on their development of impervious surface and also redevelopment. Other funding sources for stormwater, in addition to the user fees, are system development charges at about 300,000 in the upcoming year, and land alteration permits about 100,000. Next slide. And then here's the chart for the stormwater fees, and you can see they're kind of a little bit all over the place. Portland on the far left has a significant fee. The average of these fees is $11.94. You can see over to the left where Springfield is currently at $15.24. That's for a single family residential account. And then Eugene is right next to us at $15. And you can see you can go all the way down to Veneta at $2.59. So each community has its own unique circumstances. In our case, here in Springfield, we happen to be nestled between two rivers. So it's the Willamette River and the McKenzie River, and we're responsible through our permit to make sure runoff, to take care of runoff and not allow for those rivers to be impacted in a negative way and the aquatic habitat. So next slide.
I'll just add here too that Springfield had the first MS4 phase 2 permit issued in the state. One of the reasons for our rate being higher than several of these communities, for example, Albany, their rate has increased substantially in the last couple of years. They're not actually yet a permittee due to the way the census was done 10 years back. They will be getting their first permit shortly and will be catching up to us as time goes on. So just additional info.
Okay, and this is looking back at the adopted rates. So we're showing 2 years here. The fiscal year 1920, you can see that we had 2% across the board for local wastewater services, stormwater services, and then combined, of course, it's 2%. In this current fiscal year that we're in, the decision was made for user fees to remain level, and you can see that those monthly residential bills have just carried forward in this current year. And so next slide. So when we're looking forward here at proposed, option 1 is the option that is 3% for both local wastewater services and stormwater services. It ends up being, if you assume the 5,000 gallons, it ends up being 72 cents for the wastewater component, the local wastewater component, and 46 cents for stormwater. When combined, it's $1.18. So this is the higher of the two. I would point out that the local wastewater has a 3% in both scenarios. It's not one that can go lower than that. But given that the impervious surface in stormwater is somewhat fixed, if we go to the next option, you'll see that the stormwater is reduced to 2.5%. So that's a 38-cent increase monthly for a single family residential. And when we combine those two, it ends up being a 2.8% or $1.10. Now, this does assume on the wastewater side that the customer is using the 5,000 gallons, but we do know that we have customers that use much less than that as well. Next slide. So really our rate options are one of the two, the first being a full 3% at $1.18. And the proposed option is number 2 at 2.8% combined and $1.10 for a customer that would use 5,000 gallons of wastewater. And then next slide, We did have our rates adopted by the Metropolitan Wastewater Management Commission, having to do with the regional component. And that was a 3.5% adjustment, resulting in 95 cents if you are that customer that has a 5,000 gallon usage. And with that,
Okay, with that, I think we're ready for entertaining discussions or the questions in our discussion, and any feedback we can take to the public hearing next week.
Leonard,
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for that presentation. It was really informative. So let me ask, what would the sacrifice be to the stormwater system in terms of services and infrastructure were we to adopt the 2.5% instead of the 3%?
we're actually recommending the option 2, which is the 2.5%.
Right, but if we were to adopt the 2.5%, what would the difference be from the 3% in terms of services and infrastructure? In other words, would we be replacing less pipe, for instance, in the stormwater system?
No, what we would be doing is just slightly reducing the, the capital reserve.
It's a fairly nominal amount. We're talking less than $100,000. That would not go or not be transferred to our capital reserve.
Okay, well, I'm going to take what may be an unpopular position here, which is that I always try to err on the side of better maintenance, just to avoid the necessity of greater expenditures later, further down the road. And so I would like to just advocate for number 1, which would be fully funding the wastewater and the stormwater systems. Thanks.
anybody else? Joe?
That's pretty amazing, Leonard, actually. We actually, on the commission, I sit on that commission, and we go through this really in depth, and I can vouch that nothing's going to suffer. We would definitely not have landed on 2.5 recommendation if anything was going to suffer. And I think there's a lot of, and Catherine, you can probably chime in, but we forecast quite a ways into the future to make sure that our systems are up to date. And and frankly, the whole system that we have here in this region is well renowned and probably one of the better systems in the West, as far as I'm concerned. So as part of the commission, I would never advocate suffering, the system suffering to try to keep the rates low. We try to keep the rates low, but we're not going to recommend those particular rate increases if it's going to pull away from the quality of service and our equipment, for sure. And I appreciate that too. I really do. That's pretty cool.
Steve?
I think this budget is fine, but I would look at the projected future, and it's never steady. It going up from 3% to 5% on local wastewater, and it's compounded. I'm just worried about the future. We're worried about now, but as we look out there, I'm concerned. So.
And I would point out that the city did restructure some revenue bonds over the last year and was able to bring them down to a much lower interest rate. And so that's allowing for, if you want to choose option 1 or 2, either way is good. But just to add that the revenue bonds were restructured with a very low interest rate. And so there's been some savings there. And then also, given the street bond, there's going to be plenty of street work and, curb cuts and things like that. But within those projects, there's fewer stormwater elements with, so those are just a few things to consider.
And to Councilor Mo's point, our projections are based on best known information on what's going to be contained in the permits that we're getting from DEQ. It's part of the reason that the council chose to contest the last permit, given some of the things that were in there and the costs associated with potentially not being able to meet those obligations. And then this is not necessarily unique just to us. It's happening it's a national issue with respect to water quality permits and infrastructure. We were fortunate enough to sit on a panel with Representative DeFazio a week and a half ago to talk about this, but really I think in the long term, it's being addressed in a couple of ways, but there's not a whole lot of progress. But looking at getting the federal government back to being a partner with the local agencies to help pay for some of these needs, and then looking at some ratepayer affordability issues for low-income residents.
Anyway, I'm just concerned about the future. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? I have just a couple of questions here. So when we talk about the permit, right, and I think we ask this question every single year, probably 15 years ago, we'd go years without any sort of increase in these fees whatsoever, right? But like when we think about the future, there's always, like, we're always going to have to be investing in the system. The years of 0% increases are essentially gone. Is that correct?
That's correct, Counselor. I mean, we have multiple challenges, increasing water quality requirements with new standards and more people moving to the state, aging infrastructure, new infrastructure, the list goes on. And so we're trying to adhere to a philosophy of small incremental planned rate increases over time so we can avoid rate spikes and defer taking on future debt. But it's basically the foreseeable future. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I appreciate us talking about that 5-year window, right? And trying to keep these as level as possible for folks. I know that, on the out years, they always look a little bit higher, and then we kind of sharpen our pencils as we get a little bit closer. So yeah, I really appreciate how flat, like, getting to something a little bit more consistent. All right, so Corey.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about that. So I'm sort of seeing this combination of what Councilor Moe said and what you said. And I think that there's, some of you know, I also sit on the budget committee for sub. So, so that's real in that, those days, I mean, things are changing in terms of how we need to manage water and how we need to invest in our infrastructure. But I think that there's some storytelling that we could do around that, because I don't think that people necessarily understand that. And so I think we have an opportunity to sort of talk about that and talk about why it is that it's so important that we invest in this and we manage it. And I also am hearing that to sort of get people to understand and be used to, what can they expect in terms of a raise? Because I think once people start to understand that, oh yeah, this is the world we live in, the more that we can tell that story so that people understand what's coming, the less it's going to be like every year, like, what the heck? So.
Joe.
Corey and I both sit on subs water or on the budget committee, and water is going crazy out there. So that's not our problem, but we sure see that every year.
To Councilor Rodley's point, that you're right on point. We've done quite a bit of public opinion research in the past, and folks really value their water systems and their recreational opportunities. And we've done quite a bit of outreach to tie, what we're doing to the values that they have. But there's always room for more and to continue to do that work.
Joe.
So, yeah, Corey, actually, and I'll even expound a little bit further on what Matt had just said, is that we have a really robust, we meaning MWMC, have a very robust program now that is, I don't know, Matt, has it been in the last 3 years, how much resources we put into that to help the citizens realize that, oh yeah, hey, by the way, we got a big old plant in North Eugene that's taking care of a lot of stuff. But we're doing a really good job, but we've done a real poor job, at least historically, on getting that word out to the citizens. But you'll see, in fact, I think I just did a video a week or so, last week or something, that we're going to be rolling out more and more, that public relations piece, the social media piece, and potentially even some television type stuff. But we really, you're right. And it's, we need to make people aware, but it's just not a fun subject. And a lot of people just don't give a rip as long as when they go kapoosh, it disappears and not stays there, so it's a tough subject to really get people interested in, but I get it. And so does the commission. And there's a lot of effort, a ton of effort to do that. So you're on point. It's just trying to get that saturation level with the citizens. So I'm really proud. In case you can't tell, I'm really proud of that commission, and it really is. They're doing a great job, and we're looking at all aspects of it, and treating this region the way it should be treated, and our rivers, and the fish. Everything is so important, and they're just doing a great job. I don't know how else to say it, but thank you for those comments. That's true. It's just got to get that word out, and people just don't want to really listen too much, but we'll keep trying.
I think you guys have enough direction. So unless anybody's got any other comment, then I think we're good here. All right. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So second item tonight's the Sand-Pack user fees. And it looks like it's with Sam. Hello, Sam.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council. So for those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Sam Kelly-Quattrochi. I'm a finance analyst in our finance office here. So I am here tonight, much like Catherine and Matt, seeking guidance from our Sand-Pack partner proposed rate increase for solid waste recycling. So we're looking at about a 2.1% increase this year. Briefly looking ahead, I will be back here next week to talk about the rest of the master fees and charges. And then again in 2 weeks after that
Sam, can we, I'm sorry, can we just hang on a second? Because I forgot about Leonard's thing. So go ahead.
Yeah, you know what I'm going to say. I represent members at Sand-Pack for the Teamsters Union, and so I'm going to have to recuse myself on this item. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, and I thank you for that. Yeah. So after speaking with Sand-Pack on this, I felt the 2.1% increase was reasonable, especially considering they didn't adjust their rates last year due to COVID-19. This 2.1 increase is a combination of two factors. It is a 2.1% CPI for Sand-Pack's operational costs, and then a 2.1 increase in the Lane County tipping fee. So on the most commonly used 35-gallon container, it would be about a 40-cent increase from $19 to $19.40. Happy to run through some of the attachments if you all wanted to. I kind of want to keep this a little more open and kind of discuss any questions or concerns you might have about this.
Corey?
Thanks, Sam. So my only question, because I don't want to do the math myself, is does it, and so it's sort of asking you for some opinion, and you've done the math, is I just sort of glanced at the proposed rate adjustment, and I wanted to know if it's an equitable rate adjustment. Is it like down the way across the board, or is there any like, is it a 2-can or 3-can? Is there any place where people are more or less affected by the rate increase is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, as far as I've been known, it's an equitable increase across all the rates. There's no changing or kind of management across there.
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? Okay. Sam, it seems pretty easy. So I'm seeing head nods, I hope, that to go ahead and prep this for a public meeting.
Okay. Wonderful.
Joe?
I'm sorry, I can do it. Just a quick question, if you could, Sam. It shows that the fuel rates is getting, apparently it looks like it's being passed on, but it shows December of $1.88, and this last month, a couple months ago, is at $2.38.
I'm sorry, where are you seeing fuel rates? My apologies.
Oh, I apologize. I'm actually looking at the solid waste haulers and where Lane County is kicking in there or showing their costs. So did anybody look at their materials they handed off to you? I mean, it sounds like this is just a handoff pass-through money cost thing, but is anybody questioning the numbers they're providing you as opposed to, okay, that's fine, let's pass it off to the users? But I'm looking at some of their numbers that they're using for those increases, and I question those. Did anybody question those?
I don't believe so on my end. I can reach back out to our Santa Pac partners and ask them about that. But you are correct. This is sort of the pass through from Lane County's tipping fee increases. Yeah.
Right. So here we are on the end. You guys are in the middle, and you're taking information from the person with the handout, and so or the entity that has their handout. And so, is there, was there any kind of robust conversation or questioning or challenging the numbers they're using, as opposed to, okay, those look fine to us, we'll just pass them on?
No, on my end, there was not a robust conversation with Lane County. This sort of came down through the haulers as a cost that Lane County imposes on them to tip at the tipping fee. So I had not heard of it or been a part of any discussions on that up until this question. No.
So maybe it's a broader question, not to put you on the spot, but who's advocating for us?
I think part of that is going to be Santa Pac. We really use them as our partners to have these negotiations, really look at the numbers financially, and then meet with myself to kind of go through what these impacts are going to be like on their bottom line, and then the impacts on the rates for users.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe I'm not expressing it very well. I look at this and I understand that Santa Pac is looking in within them, yourselves, the entity, saying, okay, well, what all do we have to pass through to our customers? And you're basing that decision on the numbers that are provided by Lane County. And so I would like to know, is there any advocacy towards us, the ratepayers, towards Lane County, saying, okay, hey, Lane County, we want to really look at these numbers and challenge these, as opposed to, okay, here's our marching orders, so now we got to figure out how to raise rates, as opposed to who's challenging, or is there any way to challenge those marching orders from Lane County, even though I guess it's because they're the only entity and they've got sole control and they got the market. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. There's the commissioners, et cetera, and the commissioners apparently, I believe, will probably approve those rates before they get handed down to us. So is there anybody from the hauling industry at that level of meetings and advocating for us users?
Excellent. Yeah, I understand your point, your question now, and you are correct. That last line, Lane County has already proved this and sort of passed that down as sort of the market control.
Right.
No, as far as I know, there was no one from our side negotiating this or talking with Lane County. I'm not sure. Aaron Dooley was going to attend from Santa Pac. He might be on the list.
Yeah,
I
see him on the list. And
okay, we could bring him up if we wanted to ask what Santa Pac's relationship was like with this hauler fee. But no, to your point, no, there were no negotiating or meetings on our side with Lane County over this.
So do we, but we have to pass this off to a public hearing anyway. So what I would just maybe ask, if Joe's good with this, is that we just prep that and ask Aaron to, comment about their actual process when we get to the public hearing.
Right. No, I'm fine. I mean, I'm okay with doing this, but I just want to raise the point that I want to see some stronger advocacy, or at least some sort of documentation or something that some sort of proofing, as opposed to, because they're the only dog in the fight, so to speak, and they can name their price. And I don't like that position, so to speak. It's not, I don't know if it has, and I may be wrong. I just want to see if there is some advocacy for us ratepayers as citizens, as opposed to being at the mercy of a pass-through when we really don't have any control whatsoever. I mean, we could tell you no, and then we're gonna have a problem. We don't want to. We understand you got a higher cost, but I'm just questioning the higher costs, and it's a bigger picture. I get it, but it's something I think is worth some effort on the local cities and agencies to step forward and say, okay, we need to start looking at these, and we need to have some people advocate for us ratepayers.
Excellent. Yeah, I will take that guidance and I'll run with that after this meeting and start looking into that. I could hazard a guess that even with this 2.1% increase, the next closest dumping site is still more expensive for Santa Pac hauler to go out there. But I will look into that for you for sure and make sure I get an answer back to you.
Right. They've got the corner of the market. I get that. So, but they also have a public process, and the commissioners must approve those rates.
Yeah.
So I just want to know, at what level is there someone going to be sounding off saying, okay, we don't necessarily believe those rates are in line with what's happening.
Well, and you have a good point that we don't, like, the county hands it off to the haulers, right? And they don't actually impact the public when they make their decision. We're the one that is actually making the decision that impacts the public. So All
Yeah,
right.
they get to be the nice guys, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we just have to look there and nod and bump the rates up for our citizens. And I just don't like that.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So AJ, are we on hold until 6:30 for the CETA meeting?
No, sir, that is a separate link. So we can close out of this meeting and then everyone will need to log in on your separate link that was sent to you on your for your calendars just before the 7 o'clock.
Perfect. All right. Then that is the last piece of business. Then we will see you on for the CETA meeting. We are adjourned. Thank you.